My parents told me I wasn't invited to my brother's wedding after I gave him a house worth $770,000 as a gift. My brother laughed and said, "It's only for the closest family. So while the wedding was happening, I went ahead and sold the house. What the bride did when they arrived at the house later made everyone go completely silent. It's only for the closest family. My brother had sneered, a glint of pure unadulterated contempt in his eyes, oblivious to the fact that his words were tearing a permanent rift in our relationship, a rift that had just cost him a $770,000 house. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they were toasting his closest family at the wedding, I was signing the papers to sell the very house I'd gifted him. The look on his bride's face when she finally arrived at what she thought was their new home was, according to multiple sources I later spoke with, a picture of silent, utter devastation that spoke volumes. Now, that's quite the bombshell to drop, isn't it? A family torn apart by greed, entitlement, and a truly epic act of poetic justice. I mean, we're talking about a gift of nearly $750,000 thrown back in someone's face only to be reclaimed with a swift, brutal efficiency that still gives me chills. This isn't just a story, it's a masterclass in how far human ego can push things, and how a seemingly gentle soul can be pushed to the brink and exact a perfectly legal, perfectly justifiable revenge. I want to unpack every single layer of this. Our protagonist, let's call them Alex, originally shared this story on Reddit, and the internet, as you might imagine, absolutely erupted. And why wouldn't it? It has all the elements of a classic Greek tragedy, but with modern real estate and a dash of sibling rivalry that spiraled completely out of control. Before the storm, there was, as with most grand tales of family betrayal, a period of relative calm, or perhaps a simmering unease that was expertly ignored. Alex, our user, paints a picture of a life that on the surface seemed idyllic. They had worked incredibly hard, carved out a highly successful career in tech, accumulating a significant amount of wealth through smart investments and sheer grit. This wasn't inherited money, this was earned dollar by painstaking dollar. They lived comfortably but not extravagantly, always maintaining a level head and a desire to help those they cared about. The user often described themselves as the responsible one in the family, a role they'd unconsciously adopted from a young age. Their younger brother, Mark, was, by contrast, the charming one, the attention seeker. Now, I've seen this dynamic play out countless times in families, and it's almost a textbook setup for future resentment. The responsible sibling, often burdened with expectations, and the charismatic one, often given a longer leash. Their parents, bless their hearts, seem to perpetuate this dynamic. Alex, the overachiever, was always praised for their accomplishments, but Mark, the underachiever, was often coddled. His mistakes excused with a sigh and a, "That's just Mark being Mark." This wasn't outright favoritism, not initially, but it was a subtle, insidious imbalance. Alex was the anchor, the one expected to be strong and self-sufficient, while Mark was the ship that always needed guiding back to shore. Now, this is where I want to pause for a moment and delve into something I often observe in these narratives: the people-pleasing tendency or the perfectionist burden. Often, the high-achieving child in a family, like Alex, learns early on that their value and affection are tied to their achievements and their ability to solve problems, not just for themselves, but for others. They become the family's fixer, the one who smooths things over, the one who can be counted on. This can lead to a deep-seated need for external validation and a difficulty in setting boundaries, especially with family members who have learned to exploit this dynamic. Alex's generosity, while admirable, might have been unconsciously fueled by this desire to maintain their role, to be seen as the good child, to earn that love and respect that felt conditional. It makes them incredibly vulnerable, doesn't it? Alex loved their brother genuinely, despite the differences in their paths. There was a foundational bond. They had shared childhood memories, scraped knees, and whispered secrets. As they grew older, however, the gap between their lives widened. Alex soared while Mark consistently struggled to find his footing, bouncing from one short-lived venture to another, often relying on small loans from his parents, loans that, more often than not, were never repaid. Alex always watched from a distance, offering advice when asked, but largely staying out of it, believing Mark needed to learn independence. The idea of gifting Mark a house, however, wasn't a sudden impulse. Mark had recently become engaged to a woman named Sarah, and this seemed to Alex like a pivotal moment. Mark talked about finally settling down, starting a family, finding stability. Alex, always eager to see their brother succeed, saw this as an opportunity to provide a solid foundation, a fresh start. No more renting, no more struggling, a proper home for his new family. It was an act of profound sibling love, a genuine desire to uplift. The house itself was a beautiful, recently renovated property in a desirable suburban area, close enough to family, but with its own sense of community. The appraisal came in at a staggering $770,000. For Alex, it was a significant investment, but one they felt was worth it for Mark's future happiness. They didn't just hand over the keys, they meticulously handled all the keys, they meticulously handled all the paperwork, ensuring the deed was in Mark's name, wanting to make it a true, no strings attached gift. Or so they thought. This act of immense generosity, this investment in their brother's future, was perhaps the greatest setup for the betrayal to come. They were, in a way, laying down their own emotional red carpet for the very people who would later walk all over them. And this, my friends, is where the story truly begins to unravel. Even after the house was officially gifted, things weren't immediately perfect. There were subtle shifts, small tremors before the earthquake. The first few red flags, in retrospect, were dismissed by Alex as minor annoyances or Mark's usual sloppiness. But as we're about to see, that was just the tip of the iceberg. One incident sticks out vividly in Alex's memory. It happened about 3 months after the house was transferred. Alex had driven by the new house, intending to drop off some housewarming gifts, a new set of garden tools, a high-quality espresso machine Mark had always wanted. What they saw shocked them. The lawn was overgrown, there were empty takeout containers littering the porch, and a window was visibly cracked. Alex called Mark, immediately concerned. The conversation as Alex recounts it went something like this. "Hey Mark, I just drove past the house. Everything okay? The lawn's a bit of a jungle. And is that window cracked?" Mark chuckled a little too dismissively. "Oh, that? Yeah, Sarah and I have just been super busy with wedding planning. And you know, we're not exactly gardeners. Are we?" As for the window, probably just a stray ball. Nothing major, Alex pressed. "But Mark, it's a new house. You should really get that window fixed before it gets worse. And the lawn, maybe hire someone." Mark sighed, a dramatic put upon sound. "Look, Alex, I appreciate the concern, but it's our house now, isn't it? We'll get to it. You know, you're always so particular. We're just trying to enjoy our engagement." Wait, I actually had to read that twice to make sure it was real. "It's our house now." That phrase, delivered with that sigh, carries such a heavy weight of entitlement. It's not just dismissing Alex's concern. It's almost a subtle way of saying, you gave it to me, so now it's none of your business. It completely negates the act of generosity and turns it into a transaction where Alex has no further say. This right here was a small but significant crack in their relationship. Much like the window in the house, another incident involved the wedding planning itself. Alex, being financially stable and genuinely happy for Mark, had offered to contribute a significant sum towards the wedding expenses above and beyond the house. They offered to cover the catering, a substantial portion of the cost. Mark and Sarah initially accepted with effusive thanks. However, a few weeks later, Alex overheard a conversation between Mark and their mother. Mark was complaining about the cost of the venue, saying he wished he had more money. Alex later approached him confused. "Hey Mark, I thought I was covering the catering. Isn't that helping with the costs?" Mark looked uncomfortable. "Oh yeah, you are. But you know things just add up, and Sarah really wants that specific floral arrangement, and the band is more expensive than we thought." Alex felt a prickle of irritation. "So you're saying my contribution isn't enough? You still want Mo?" Mark actually laughed. "Well, you do have plenty, don't you? It's not like you're struggling. We're just trying to have the wedding of our dreams, and, you know, family helps family." That line, "family helps family," coming from a man who had just brushed off concerns about a house given to him and who seemed to be subtly guilt-tripping his generous sibling for more, was a huge red flag. Alex, in their characteristic people-pleasing way, ended up offering a bit more just to avoid an argument to keep the peace. This brings me to a crucial point about the psychology of manipulation within families. This isn't always overt villainy. Often it's a slow drip of microaggressions, veiled expectations, and emotional blackmail of the manipulator. In this case, Mark learns to exploit the other person's good nature and their desire for harmony. Alex's inability to say no stemmed from years of fulfilling the responsible sibling role. This leads us to a discussion on the sunk cost fallacy. In economics and psychology, this fallacy describes our tendency to continue an endeavor or to continue investing in something if we've already invested a lot of time, money, or effort into it, even if continuing is not the rational choice. Alex had already invested so much emotionally and financially into Mark and his future, especially with the house. To back out, to be even question his motives too harshly would feel like negating all that previous effort. It's the reason people stay in bad relationships, finish terrible movies, or keep pouring money into failing businesses. Alex was perhaps unconsciously falling victim to this, believing that if they just kept giving, kept helping, kept pushing, Mark would eventually turn around and appreciate it. The final red flag before the ultimate betrayal concerned the wedding guest list. Alex was helping their mother with some log. Physical details, including looking over the initial RSVP list, they noticed something peculiar. Many distant relative, third cousins, and even Mark's old college buddies, who Alex barely knew, were listed. But several closer family friends, people Alex grew up with and who were practically adopted aunts and uncles, were missing. Alex mentioned it to their mother, casually. "Mom, did Aunt Carol and Uncle Bob get their invite? I don't see them on here." Their mother looked flustered. "Oh, honey, Mark and Sarah are trying to keep the guest list small." You know how expensive weddings are these days. Alex thought that was odd, especially after Mark had been so insistent on having the wedding of his dreams and pushing for more financial help. But they let it go. They had no idea just how small that guest list was about to get for them. These incidents, when viewed in isolation, might seem minor, but strung together, they paint a clear picture of a brother whose sense of entitlement was growing unchecked, fueled by his parents' passive acceptance and Alex's immense generosity. The stage was being set not for a joyful celebration, but for a devastating act of exclusion. The phone call came 2 weeks before the wedding. Alex was at work, immersed in a complex project, when their mother's number flashed on the screen. There was an unusual tremor in her voice, a hesitancy that immediately put Alex on edge. "Alex," she began, "there's something we need to tell you." Alex's heart sank. "Mom, what is it? Is everything okay with Dad?" No, it's not your father," she said, her voice dropping. "It's about the wedding, Mark and Sarah. They've decided to make it a very, very intimate affair. Just immediate family, you know. They want it to be exclusive." Alex frowned, confused. "But I am immediate family. I'm his brother. What are you talking about?" There was a long, awkward silence on the other end. Then their mother finally blurted it out. They've decided not to invite you, honey." Mark said. "He said it's only for the closest family. And that you're not on the list. Let that sink in for a second. Not invited to your own brother's wedding. The brother you just gifted a nearly $800,000 house to. The brother whose wedding you contributed significantly towards. The brother whose life you had consistently tried to support. This wasn't just a slight, it was a bludgeon to the chest. It was a rejection of familial bond, a public declaration of non-belonging, delivered with the flimsy excuse of closest family. Alex felt a cold wave wash over them, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Closest family?" Alex repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Mom, I gave him a house, and I'm not close enough." Their mother started to cry, a soft, helpless sound. "I tried, Alex, I really did. Your father and I, we both tried to talk sense into them." But Mark was adamant. He said you always make things about you, that you overshadow him, and that he wants this day to be all about them. The accusation that they always make things about them was a classic gaslighting tactic. This is a perfect moment to discuss gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person or group covertly sows seeds of doubt in a targeted individual, making them question their own memory, perception, or sanity. It's designed to make the victim feel confused, anxious, and unable to trust their own judgment, ultimately eroding their self-esteem and making them more dependent on the manipulator. Here, Mark is attempting to rewrite Alex's history of generosity into a narrative of self-centeredness, twisting facts to suit his agenda and invalidate Alex's feelings. But is insidious. Alex hung up the phone, shaking. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every past slight, every dismissed concern, every veiled demand from Mark suddenly coalesced into a horrifying, crystal clear pattern. It wasn't about closest family. It was about power. It was about Mark's deeply rooted resentment and envy, masked by false humility and entitlement. And Sarah, the bride, was clearly complicit, if not the driving force behind this malicious decision. Alex recounts a deep sense of humiliation, not just for being uninvited, but for realizing how thoroughly they had been played. Their immense generosity had been weaponized against them. The gift of a home meant to foster love and security had become a prop in Mark's narrative of self-importance. For a brief, agonizing period, Alex felt an overwhelming desire to simply disappear, to nurse the wound in private. But then something snapped. The years of being the responsible one, the people pleaser, the one who smoothed things over, all of it shattered. The betrayal was too profound, the disrespect too blatant. This isn't just a slight, it was a fundamental attack on their identity and their bond with their family. A cold, clear resolve began to set in. The house, the $770,000 house. It was technically Mark's, but the emotional contract, the underlying agreement of sibling love and respect that had prompted the gift had been irrevocably broken by Mark's own hand. Alex realized that the gift had been given under a false premise, under the assumption of a reciprocal relationship that clearly didn't exist for Mark. And that's when the idea, audacious and utterly devastating in its simplicity, began to form: an eye for an eye, a house for an exclusion. The rage previously suppressed ignited a fierce protective fire within Alex. If they weren't closest family, then Mark didn't deserve the benefit. It's of that closeness, the generosity that had been taken for granted and then spat upon would be swiftly and decisively revoked. The game as Alex saw it had just changed, and Mark and Sarah had absolutely no idea what was coming. The decision made Alex moved with a chilling efficiency that few would have expected from someone previously described as a people pleaser. This wasn't about petty revenge, it was about reclaiming dignity and what had been given under false pretenses. The investigation wasn't about uncovering secrets, but about meticulously planning the undoing of Mark's grand illusion. Alex transformed into a strategist, a detective orchestrating a perfectly legal, devastating countermove. The first step was to confirm the legal standing. Alex reached out to their real estate lawyer, a trusted professional they had worked with for years. The conversation was terse, businesslike. I gifted my brother a house. The deed is in his name. Is there any way to reverse this given a severe breach of familial trust and clear manipulation? The lawyer, who knew Alex well, listened patiently. Alex explained the situation, the exclusion from the wedding, the closest family. Remark, the lawyer confirmed that while directly reclaiming a gifted property is incredibly difficult, once the deed is transferred, there was a crucial detail. The house, while deeded to Mark, still had a significant mortgage taken out by Alex years prior, which they had continued to pay. This was a detail Alex had meticulously managed, wanting to shield Mark from the initial financial burden while he got his life together. This is where it gets interesting, and it leads us to a discussion on leverage and power dynamics. Alex, in their desire to help, had unknowingly retained significant leverage. While the house was legally Mark's, the financial obligation debt attached to it was still very much Alex's. This meant Alex was paying a mortgage on a house that was now owned by someone who had openly disrespected and rejected them. The power dynamic which Mark had attempted to shift entirely in his favor was, in fact, still very much balanced, if not tilted, towards Alex. The lawyer explained that Alex could perfectly legally cease paying the mortgage. This would lead to foreclosure, ruining Mark's credit, and eventually the house would revert to the bank or be sold off. But there was a cleaner, more immediate path. Alex still held the original promissory note and deed of trust from when they had purchased the house. They had essentially loaned Mark the house with an incredibly generous repayment schedule, or rather, no repayment schedule, as Alex had been covering it. The lawyer advised that Alex could formally demand repayment of the entire remaining mortgage balance immediately or face legal action, including forcing a sale of the property. Mark would have no way to repay it as he had no significant assets or income. The house would have to be sold. This was the elegant solution. It wasn't about taking the house back in a messy legal battle. It was about enforcing a dormant but legally binding financial obligation. Alex moved swiftly. The demand letter was drafted and sent to Mark and Sarah, demanding full repayment of the mortgage within 48 hours. Alex knew with absolute certainty that they couldn't meet it. It was a formal legal notification that the grace period was over. Meanwhile, Alex quietly contacted a trusted real estate agent, not the one who had helped with the original purchase, but a different one, ensuring discretion. They explained the unique circumstances. A brother who was refusing to move out of a property that was technically theirs, but would soon be forced into sale. The agent, XP, Ryanston Complex Situations, understood. They prepared all the necessary paperwork to list the house for a quick sale, contingent on the legal process playing out. They even had a buyer lined up who was willing to move quickly, knowing the market was hot. Alex also contacted their parents, not to tell them about the impending sale, but to gauge their reaction further to see if there was any chance of intervention or regret from Mark. The conversation was disheartening. Their mother was still tearful, saying Mark was too sensitive and that Sarah was a bit of a handful, but essentially echoing Mark's sentiment. He just wants his own day, Alex. Can't you understand? There was no apology for Mark's behavior, no understanding of the depth of the insult. This hardened Alex's resolve even further. The parents were still enablers, unwilling to confront Mark's entitlement. This illustrates another crucial psychological concept: enmeshment and codependency within family systems. Often, parents, in an attempt to keep the peace or out of a misguided sense of loyalty, fail to hold one child accountable, especially if that child consistently plays the victim or uses emotional manipulation. This can create an enmeshed system where healthy boundaries are absent, and the well-being of one individual, Mark in this case, is prioritized over the rights and feelings of another, Alex. The parents' response wasn't supportive or empathetic to Alex. It was an attempt to manage Alex's emotions to prevent any disruption to Mark's big day, further reinforcing Mark's problematic behavior. The demand letter expired. Mark predictably hadn't responded, likely believing it was an empty threat. threat or that Alex would eventually back down, as they always had. He was still living in the house, oblivious, planning his exclusive wedding. Alex then gave the real estate agent the green light. The house was officially listed, and with the prearranged buyer, the sale was processed at lightning speed. All the necessary legal notices were served to Mark, informing him of the imminent sale and the requirement to vacate the premises by a specific date, which, by a twist of poetic irony, happened to be the day after his wedding. Alex had carefully planned this. They wanted the full devastating impact to hit Mark and Sarah when they were at the apex of their self-congratulatory celebration. The timing was crucial. It wasn't about disrupting the wedding itself. It was about ensuring that the moment of realization would be as stark and inescapable as possible. While Mark was laughing, oblivious, celebrating his new life in marriage, the very foundation of that new life in marriage, was being systematically dismantled brick by brick, document by document. The money from the sale, minus legal fees and the outstanding mortgage balance, was returned to Alex's account, a clean, decisive financial maneuver. The house was sold, the funds recovered, and the betrayal answered. All that was left was for the unsuspecting newlyweds to discover their fate. And oh, what a discovery that would be. The wedding day arrived. Alex, of course, was not there. They spent the day quietly, reflecting on the whirlwind of emotions and decisions that had led to this point. There was a sense of profound sadness for the loss of a brother, a bond irrevocably shattered, but also a quiet, fierce satisfaction. Justice in its own way was about to be served. The story of what the bride did after arriving at the house is where the narrative reaches its crescendo, a moment of pure, silent, devastating irony. Mark and Sarah, having just been married in their intimate ceremony, were chauffeured to what they believed was their new home. They arrived flushed with newlywed bliss, likely anticipating word and bliss, likely anticipating devastating what, hulking into their beautifully decorated free house. But what they found instead was a house with a sold sign hammered into the lawn, a real estate lockbox on the door, and an eviction notice taped prominently to the front door, according to the reliable accounts Alex later gathered from the real estate agent who was present and from the bewildered chauffeurs who witnessed the scene. Sarah's reaction was instantaneous and visceral. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there on the manicured lawn, which ironically had been professionally mowed by Alex's agent as part of the sale prep. Staring at the notice, her mouth fell open and her face went from radiant joy to a mask of utter shock and incomprehension. She was, for several long moments, completely silent. Mark, by contrast, apparently erupted. He reportedly tore the notice off the door, crumpled it, and started shouting, demanding to know what was going on. He tried to force the door open, but the locks had already been changed. It was the real estate agent who had been waiting for their arrival who stepped forward and calmly informed them that the property had been legally sold and was no longer theirs. The agent explained the entire situation, citing the implied mortgage demand and the subsequent legal sale. The bride, Sarah, remained silent throughout Mark's tirade, her eyes darting between the agent, the house, and finally Mark. That silence, the user notes, was more potent than any scream. It was the silence of a dream violently shattered, of a future abruptly erased, of the dawning realization of the catastrophic consequences of their shared arrogance. It spoke of deep, cold fury not directed at Alex, but at Mark for having so thoroughly mismanaged a golden opportunity. This dramatic silence often points to a concept known as narcissistic injury, while Sarah might not be a narcissist. Her dreams were likely built on the foundation of Mark's perceived generosity and success. When that foundation is pulled out, the resulting shock and silence can be due to the profound humiliation and the blow to their ego. For Mark, the public humiliation of this moment, having just proclaimed his closest family and then immediately losing the symbols of his perceived wealth, would be a severe narcissistic injury. Narcissists often react to such injuries with rage, blame shifting, or profound withdrawal, which aligns with Mark's immediate outburst. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Mark predictably launched into a furious campaign of calls and texts to Alex, full of threats, accusations, and desperate pleas. Alex, however, had blocked him on every platform. They had effectively cut him out of their life. The parents were devastated, not necessarily by Mark's actions, but by the public humiliation and the irreparable rift it created. They tried to mediate, to guilt-trip Alex, to paint them as heartless. Alex's response was firm. He chose to exclude me. He chose to throw away my generosity. I merely accepted his terms. The extended family and friends who had been invited to the wedding were a mix of shocked, appalled, and in some cases, privately relieved. Word spread like wildfire. Many of Mark's friends, previously unaware of Alex's immense generosity, were stunned. Some of Alex's closest friends and other family members who knew the full story expressed overwhelming support, praising Alex for their strength and decisive action. Mark and Sarah were less scrambling. They had nowhere to live. Their honeymoon, which had been planned around their new home, was canceled. Sarah, according to later whispers, was furious with Mark. Their marriage, built on a foundation of entitlement and deceit, began almost immediately with a seismic crack. The user later heard that within 6 months they were separated, the lavish wedding and the dream of a free house having completely backfired on them both. Alex, on the other hand, experienced a profound sense of liberation. The burden of being the responsible one, the endless giving to a black hole of need, was finally lifted. The financial impact was neutral, as the money from the sale simply returned to their accounts. But the emotional impact was neutral, as the money from the sale simply returned to their accounts. They learned to set fierce, unyielding boundaries, not just with Mark, but with anyone who sought to exploit their good nature. The ultimate lesson here, and what I want us all to take away from Alex's incredible journey, is about setting healthy boundaries and self-preservation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and paradoxically for others, is to establish clear limits. Alex's initial generosity, while coming from a place of love, had enabled Mark's entitlement. Now annulled Mark's entitlement. The painful exclusion from the wedding, while a devastating betrayal, served as a catalyst for Alex to finally recognize and dismantle those unhealthy dynamics. It was an act of self-preservation, a declaration that their own value and emotional well-being were not negotiable. It taught them that true generosity comes from a place of abundance and choice, not obligation or a desperate need for acceptance. This story serves as a stark reminder that entitlement, left unchecked, can destroy families and livelihoods. It also shows the remarkable resilience of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute breaking point. Alex lost a brother, yes, but they found something far more valuable: their self-respect, their boundaries, and an understanding of what true family, the kind that is close enough, really means. And sometimes it takes a $770,000 house, lost and reclaimed, to make that lesson truly sink in. What a ride, what a truly unforgettable story.